Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you and welcome to the latest in our series of new Arab debates coming to you this time from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Even without the murder of staff at the magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris, there'd been plenty of talk in the Arab world about extremism. But the attack and the huge international reaction to it have given the topic far greater urgency. Is extremism on the rise in the Middle East? If it is, what's causing it? What about different forms of extremism? Are repressive governments which claim to be fighting terrorism simply provoking more of it? Just some of the issues we'll be looking at as we debate the motion the Arab world is embracing extremism, not fighting it. Before we came on air, we took a vote among the studio audience. We'll take another vote at the end of the debate. We'll then compare the two and see to what extent, if any, our speakers have managed to change your mind. Speaking for the motion, Adnan Hayajne is Professor of Political Science at Qatar University. He also holds the same chair at the Hashemite University here in Jordan. He's a regular commentator on Arab affairs and international relations. Against the motion, Musa Shtewi, Director of the Center for Strategic Studies at the University of Jordan. He's also Professor of Political Sociology, with wide experience advising governments, the UN, and other international bodies on a range of topics, including gender issues, human rights, and poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our panel. Adnan Hayajne, if I could start with you. You say the Arab world is embracing extremism, but here's what disproves that. 10 Arab nations involved in combat operations in Syria and Iraq. That's putting your bullets where your mouth is, literally. That's a fight against extremism.
Yeah, I think it's a fight against extremism, but I think it depends how you find extremism. I think the Arab world, I think the Arab regimes, based on the regime survival theory.
You don't think Islamic State represents extremism?
I think even if you look at the Islamic states, I think you have to look at the numbers and the increase of numbers. If you look at ISIS, about 2011, they were about 1,000. If you look at them in 2014, they're about 30,000. And they are, representative of some of the extremists that were created by the environment.
Okay, so 10 Arab states are involved in bombing combat operations against extremist groups, aren't they?
I think it fits the regime survival theory that the Arab states are using the fight against extremism to get people attention away from the real issues, that all the ills is because of the Arab regimes. There is no economic development, there's no political development, there's a high level of corruption, all of that.
Dr. Hayajne, they're fighting Islamic State because their cities are in danger of falling to them and continued territory is falling to them.
I'm not sure if they're fighting extremism, and I think they're using this as a scapegoat for, I think, to get away from.
You don't think murder, extortion, enslavement, rape, kidnapping represents extremism?
Yes, it does, and I think most of the activities, I think people living in ghettos, they also represent almost the same situation as the situation that's happening in the areas that were created.
But you're on the side that says that the Arab world is not fighting extremism.
They are not
I'm giving you a key example of how it is fighting. You have 10 Arab states, which is remarkable unity, 10 Arab states which signed up to the Jeddah Declaration, and a number of principles saying that they would stop extremism, terrorist financing.
They used most of these extremists. I think most of the extremists, they got funding from these Arab governments. I think they were mentioning implicitly some of the wars that's going on. I think in Syria there's a cold war between some of the Arab countries and Iran. It's a proxy war. It has nothing to deal with all of the issues that I think you mentioned. But I think
we're talking about the measures that are being taken. We're debating whether the Arab world is actually taking any measures against terrorism. Look at the crackdown. Look at the crackdown on mosques that you've seen. Look at the crackdown on mosques.
They're taking some of the measures. They're fighting. I think if you look at...
So you're ready to change sides?
No, I'm not ready to change sides. Let me explain and finish my sentence. And they're doing that because I think they created some of these extremists, and the fight against extremism is a justification for their legitimacy and for their continuation power. It is part of their regime survival theory. It is good to have extremists because most of the nations...
So they created ISIS because they want to see Muslims killing Muslims?
I will ask that.
That's stretching belief a little bit, isn't it?
Not a stretching belief, but who is benefiting from the fight against ISIS? And
who is benefiting?
I think if you look at the region and the distribution of power in the region, and why people are coming to this region, it's very important to keep the U.S. and other countries involved here in the region, because they're considered to be the lifeline for most of the regimes. If the United States pivoting to Asia, and I think nothing will be here. And we know as a fact that most of the countries, the Arab countries, as will the great powers, the hegemonic powers, they're not interested in conflict resolution. They're interested only in conflict management.
Well, if you agree with that, if that's your view, why are we seeing this increasing sense of urgency from Arab leaders, including from King Abdullah here, saying, in contrast to what you've said in the notes that you sent us before, this is a Muslim problem. We need to take ownership of this. Islam is plagued by a civil war.
Well, I think I heard that.
You're ignoring the sectarian nature of the conflict that we see around the Middle East.
No, I'm not ignoring that. I saw what you just mentioned. I think I saw what Charlie wrote. I think the comments that were made by the king regarding this. But looking at the extremism and who is benefiting,
and you say it's nothing to do with Islam. You said no one can claim that Islam is to blame.
It has nothing to do with Islam. I think if you bring people from all around the world, from Norway, from Sweden, and make them live in the same conditions as the Arab people are living, you will get extremists coming from that nationalities, regardless of their religion.
There are plenty of people in the Arab world who disagree with you. I just cite one, Abdurrahman al-Rashid, one of the most prominent commentators in the world, in the Arab world. He says the story of extremism begins in Muslim societies, and it is with their support and silence that extremism has grown into terrorism.
Yes, if you get 100 million people are illiterate in the Arab world, if you get 50% of people who finished 4 years of schools, they cannot write one sentence. If you have no education...
What has that got to do with fighting extremism, which you say the Arab world is not doing?
Because they're getting all of the financial support to get it away with from economic development and political development in the nations.
I want to take issue with one other thing you said, that a regional and international coalition defeated the Arab Spring.
Yes, there is. And I think the Arab Spring...
So a regional and international coalition brought President Sisi to power in Egypt.
Of course.
Did they?
Yes, of course. And I think most of the nations...
And not the huge masses who voted for him?
Come on, the huge masses are 30 million people, and I think there's a lot of let down. I think this is one of the reasons for the rise of extremism in the Arab world. When the international community, as well...
And you don't blame the people for voting for him? They voted him back in. They called him to come back in.
But if you look at the vote, he did not get the majority of the people. There are about 100 million people.
He got the plurality of the votes, which is what counts.
And
a resounding plurality of the votes.
Morsi got almost the same percentage of votes, maybe a little bit less, but he was ousted because of his attention. This is also a reason, Tim.
That's why. And you think the West put Sisi back in?
No. They're pushing,
to repress the Egyptians.
They're pushing the moderates in the corner, especially the Muslim Brotherhoods and everybody who's a moderate. They're pushing them to the corner, and this gives a rise to the extremists. Extremists, they look at the moderate Muslim. They're pushed in the corner. They're becoming outcasted. They're becoming a prison. Look what happened to the Muslim Brotherhoods in Egypt. And here the extremists, they have no hope from the governments. They have no hope from political parties. They have no hope. They have nowhere to go. They took it into their own hands. So what was the reason for the rise of extremism?
The Egyptian people bear no responsibility for bringing back someone who has killed them in huge numbers on the streets, whose courts are handing out hundreds of death sentences after 5-minute trials, and whose guards are torturing them, apparently, according to human rights reports, in the jails.
I did not get that point, but I'm saying what's really happening to the moderate Muslims. Governments are pushing them aside, and they're not giving them opportunity, and they're giving support implicitly and explicitly to extremists, and there's a rise of extremism.
And the Arab people just really want freedom. All they want is freedom.
Yes, because...
So why did they vote Sisi back into power?
half of dictatorships left in the whole world, according to Freedom House, are in the Arab world.
So, but that doesn't answer my question.
Most of the most of the corruptions are in the Arab world.
But it doesn't answer my question about why huge numbers of Egyptians voted a man back whose army had been killing them on the streets and torturing them in the jails. Why did they do that if they wanted freedom?
I don't know, but they did.
Okay, there's your argument.
No. Let me recap. What really happened in Egypt during the Arab Spring, it has to do with the regional setting. A lot of people did not like Muslims' brotherhoods to come to power for many reasons about regional balance of power. And they were pushed aside. If they believe in freedom, if they believe in democracy, Muslim brotherhoods, the moderate, they should be given an opportunity to stay in power. And we should believe, like all other countries, in a peaceful transfer of power. And people should decide by ballots, not by bullets.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Adnan Hawajni. Musa Shtewi, you claim that the Arab world is fighting extremism. But how does the creation of more and more repressive governments fight extremism?
Well, first of all, let me challenge the notion of embracing and the Arab world. I think, there are overriding concepts that don't embrace. That means that, there is institutional, cultural structures, and, that really lend itself to extremist thinking, which is not true. Also, the Arab world is not a monolithic entity. It's has a diverse political, economic, educational.
Okay, but lumping come to my question.
Yeah,
how does the creation of more and more repressive governments fight extremism?
Well, this is not
creates it, doesn't it?
There are, yes, of course, repressive governments, but also there are democratic governments that are being created in the Arab world. There is, reform in many countries. There is,
how many countries?
Oh well, I would mention.
How many countries are reforming?
I would say Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia.
You might have some disputes about that.
Okay, that's fine, but this is at least, at least this is, I'm saying the peaceful,
Iraq is reforming?
Well, no, Iraq has been destroyed as a state, due to invasion of a foreign power. Let's be frank about this. So extremism in this region began to rise after, actually the invasion of Iraq, and then later on, due to some collapse of the states, after the Arab Spring, like in Syria and Libya.
But Dr. Shtewi, the choice on offer increasingly in the Arab world is ISIS or Sisi, isn't it?
That's not true at all. The majority of the Arab people overwhelmingly support democracy. These are, polls and studies that we know about, Arab Barometer for Democracy.
So same question, why? Why do the Egyptians call in somebody who has no idea of democracy?
No, well, I might dispute this. Actually, as Mubarak was removed by popular protest and the army, also Morsi was removed by the popular protest and the army. So the processes are the same, and then you have elections.
A police and army that, according to Human Rights Watch, systematically and deliberately killed largely unarmed protesters on political grounds in actions that likely amounted to crimes against humanity.
The forces that are in struggle with in Egypt now are not less militant. There is what I call it soft extremism.
You didn't hear what I said. They deliberately killed largely unarmed protesters on political grounds.
I'm not here to defend or discuss the Egyptian government policies. What I'm trying to say here is that the majority of the Arab people are yearning for democracy. Let me remind you of one example.
So why did they call back a man who had no intention of giving it to them?
During the Arab protest, hundreds of thousands of people in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Jordan, in Yemen, protested for months peacefully. Not one single violent act was taken. These are the real Arab people. The aspirations of the Arab people were taken away by minority of extremists or soft extremists, if you wish, and that's what the results of what we have today.
And the people bear no responsibility for that?
Well, the people, they are not organized. I mean, of course, they bear responsibility, but they are not organized. They don't have probably the resources, the means. So definitely they're part of of the process.
If the Arab world is, as you say, fighting extremism, how is it that Islamic militants can unleash an avalanche of violence throughout the region and elsewhere? It's not a very effective fight, is it?
It is very simple. You know, the rise of extremism in the region, if you go and look at the numbers, 2003 after 2003, and the collapse of the Syrian state, you know, there's a regional struggle, the regional power, international power struggle is taking place in Syria, also in Iraq, as well as in Libya. So these are the recent rise of extremism.
That's the context, but that doesn't explain why this tsunami of violence has been unleashed, which the Arab regimes are either unwilling or can't stop.
It is not the context, it is the cause, because we have regional powers that are using these groups, struggle for power. You know, and you know, again, if you look again at the data for support for these groups, there's almost no support, you know, from the Arab people for ISIS, and
no popular support.
No popular support at all. And the data,
a former government minister, talking to a journalist the other day here in Jordan, said, "You have to understand, there's a little bit of ISIS in all of us."
Well, you know, this is semantic, nice semantics.
What do you mean it's semantic?
Nice semantics.
It's a pretty blunt statement,
He's
isn't
talking
it?
about his opinion, I'm talking about data. Pure research, the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies and the CSS have done extensive polling on this issue, and there is very minimal, very little support for ISIS and for these groups.
And why are there no demonstrations against ISIS?
Well,
why?
that's
there are
question.
demonstrations for ISIS here in Jordan. In the southern city of Amman, you know as well as I do, they've seen demonstrations in support of ISIS.
Well, we have in Jordan.
The mayor of Amman is warning about an explosion in 2015.
No, there's very little support. I'm not saying there's.
So he doesn't know what he's talking about.
I'm not saying there's zero support. I'm saying there's very little support. To stress the point that the Arabs are not extremists.
So why are there no demonstrations against ISIS?
Extremist groups are hijacking the political process in the region.
If they reject extremism, why are there no demonstrations against ISIS? There are demonstrations against Charlie Hebdo, but why are there no demonstrations against ISIS?
And they do support and approve their policies and the Arab countries' involvement against ISIS, and all the measures that are taken against the radicals and the extremists in the region. If they do not demonstrate, they support the policies of their governments.
And what about the blind eye to terrorist funding that many Arab states have turned? What about that? How is that fighting extremism? In April 2014, you had the Americans pointing the finger directly at the Gulf for funding terrorism. They said, our ally Kuwait has become the epicenter of fundraising for terrorist groups in Syria. How is that fighting terrorism and extremism?
This is definitely not fighting, but this again, there's a power struggle. There's a struggle for interest and power in the region.
Well, they're either fighting it or they're not.
And they're supporting these groups. They would not actually allow these groups to operate in their own societies. They support it only outside their societies because they want to gain control and a foothold on these countries like Syria and Iraq. But they will not allow any of those to operate in their own societies. So they're not fighting extremism as such. They're fighting political forces for practical and interest of the state.
Whatever the government is doing to fight extremism, it's not working, is it? The number of Jordan's jihadi Salafists has, according to experts here, doubled since 2011. They're now said to number at least 9,000 hardcore members. Whatever they're doing, it's not working, is it? The numbers are going the wrong way.
Well, we have at least about 10,000 jihadists who came from Europe. Does that mean Europe is embracing extremism or is not working? We have 10,000 of the fighters in Syria and Iraq with ISIS and the like come from Europe. Can I say that Europe is embracing terrorism or embracing extremism? Can I say they have failed to fight it? This is a long fight. There is a military dimension to this, and there's an ideological dimension. The ideological dimension and the war and the fight against these groups is going to take a long time. It's not going to be very easy.
All right, Musa Shtewi, thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
We're going to take your questions now. Let me just remind you of the motion. The Arab world is embracing extremism, not fighting it. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Please keep it short. and we'll get a microphone to you
Before you open,
as
I
soon
think
as possible.
the question I have a reply, just a very quick reply, about saying that there are some Arab countries who are democratic. And I think there's no data set that will support that argument. And regarding that argument, if people are coming from the West, that the Western countries are embracing extremism, yes, I would argue that the people are living there, they have an identity crisis, they're living in a ghetto social situation, so that will also support. It has nothing to do with being an Arab, or it has nothing to be an Islamic.
Okay, there was a gentleman there who had a question. You, sir, yeah.
As an Iraqi in this audience, I did not hear the word Salafi except once. There is, in fact, in my opinion, a change in the Arab world.
Please? I'm sorry, so we can get a look.
There is, in fact, a change in the Islamic culture, an increase in extremism over the last 40 years, when the Salafi thought and Wahhabi thought have moved from a minority thought to almost a majority thought. This was not addressed by any of you gentlemen.
Musa Shtewi.
Well, I agree that there is, a rise in religious conservatism in the region, and our studies, confirm that. However, that does not mean that people are against democracy and against modernity. At the same time, the majority, as I said, of the Arab people
What does it mean?
do support.
Of course, it means they're against modernity and democracy.
What it means that they are not. They are, again, the aspirations of the Arab people in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Yemen, were hijacked by groups that do not believe in democracy, what I would call soft extremism. And not all Salafis are violent, or promote violence.
Soft extremism, with the number of people who are dying in Yemen, for instance. This is soft extremism.
This is not soft extremism, and I'm sorry. Not all Salafis, call for violence. Many of them actually call for the respect of the leaders, of course. And I want to add one more point. The notion of Salafism exclude. There has not been a discussion or talk about the other types of militant groups in Iraq. There's at least 2 or 3 militia groups that are also practicing whatever against the other groups in Yemen and other countries. Not only the Salafis, but also there are other. And I think it's political groups.
Okay.
These are political groups and not only social
All right,
groups.
Adnan Hayaji.
Most of the Salafis, I think they were created, I think, in conjunction with the governments. I think they give legitimacy for the governments, and this is the majority of them. And this is kind of the breach for more extremism, and they fight the proxy wars, I think, in Iraq and Syria against the Shiite. We don't have a clash of civilizations. We have a clash within civilization. The other, I think, I'm not really concerned about this because they're supportive of the status quo. They're supportive of the governments. I am really concerned about the literalist jihadists who just take it as it is, and they could be very small numbers. But if you get 400 million Arab people, if you get 40 out of each million, you get about 40,000, and this is I think enough to ruin everything. But if you go back, who created Iraq and who benefited from Iraq? Most of the Arab states, for regime survival theory, they were interested to getting rid of Saddam Hussein, and now they have to pay the price.
All right.
About funding terrorism in Syria, if I may just finish, briefly. All of the people, even us, we have a lot of sympathy to support the Syrian people in the fight against Assad. But after the chemical bargain, I think, with the United States, with the international powers, nobody's talking about Assad. And we let the people down.
Okay, all right, you made your point. You made your point. There was a gentleman over there. You have a question.
Good evening. I wish we were embracing extremism. We're actually competing with extremists on the heavenly legitimacy. The Arab countries are actually trying to compete on who represents God, religion. We don't argue the concept. We're shy about arguing the actual actions on ground. We talk about timing. For sure, we're embracing extremism, but in a very crazy way, Governments sends letters to al-Baghdadi arguing his speeches. They have sent letters to schools from 100 and plus Muslim scientists to argue what Baghdadi is saying. Come on, guys. You're trying to really make a debate with Baghdadi? Thank you.
Musa Shtewi?
I think, I agree with him that, the ideological battle so far has been on religious grounds, and I disagree. This is not the right approach and the right policy. I totally agree with you. It's a wrong policy, but I think it's being revised and being criticized, very publicly, because if you go to the religious interpretation, you end up in the same path, the same end. So, and I agree that this approach is not the best approach, but it's not the only approach. I think the best approach is really to enhance democracy more, civil society, and
of which there's very little sign.
Well, actually, there are a lot of forces that are working for this. So, again, this is, we're talking about multiple actors in this, not only the governments, but also political parties, civil society, individuals, writers, intellectuals.
Okay.
So, it's a huge, long-term fight.
Adnan Hayaj, what about education? How key is education?
I think
to eradicating extremism?
Education is very, very important. I think we do not.
But it's a slow process, isn't it?
It's very slow. When you get 100 million people are illiterate in the Arab world, their ages are from 15 to 45. They are supposed to be in the working force. If you get 50% of the kids who finish 4 years of primary school, they cannot solve one simple math problem, and they cannot write one complete sentence. If you get people graduating from universities,
but the Salafis and the extremists are not coming from the illiterates. I must remind you, they are coming from
if you allow
the
only
middle and
the
upper
governments,
classes.
if you do not allow everybody a free speech to express themselves and people to have cross-examinations, we are.
What about Dr. Shtewi's point?
We're supposed to take everything from governments as coming from God, and we are not supposed to question that. If you question that, you are outcasted. You are a black sheep. You are an opposition. You are disloyal. You are this. You are that. And even professors complain about that. I think if you look at people who have grievances, a lot of grievances, most of the Arab people, according to the Arab barometer, they cannot have enough food to survive. In most of the Arab countries, they do not have enough food.
Lady in the front row there.
Hanal Galal from Libya. I have a question. If the Arabs are embracing terrorism and extremism, why Libya is not stabilized till now and is not controlled by ISIS or extremism, and why the city of Benghazi is paying the price by the international, national, and regional failure to stabilize the country, which is a simple state with one religion, one Sunni, Maliki, and still extremism is spreading?
I think if you look at the empirical analysis, if you look at the Global Terrorism Index, for example, at 2014, and if you look at the correlation therein, and I think you find a high correlation between if you live in areas of gross human violations, a rise of extremism, and the rise of terrorism. So this is expected in places like Libya and Iraq and Syria.
Why is Libya so broken? Why is it remaining so broken?
Because I think the whole idea, if you look at the trends and the patterns of behavior, that whenever the United States is leading something, they are not really interested in nation building or solving the conflict. They are only interested in managing conflicts.
Well, you could argue that Benghazi is still standing as a city because the Americans and others bombed Gaddafi's forces, and Gaddafi fully intended to raze it to the ground. You could argue that.
No.
As many in the West have.
I think it was a bad example, I think, from the United States, and I think most of the intervention...
Well, they shouldn't have saved Benghazi.
I think they should not even intervene from the beginning.
Question there, the lady there. Yes, you please. Yeah.
Hi. So the debate, the motion is the Arab world is embracing extremism. Who is the Arab world? Because first it was the Arab governments, and out of 23 Arab governments, maybe, and it's a big maybe, that Tunisia has a government that represents the people. Then it was the Muslims, and apparently as Arabs we don't have Christians, Jews, or atheists. And when we say Muslims, that doesn't mean Arabs, because there are a lot of Muslims in Asia, a lot of Muslims are across the world. So who do you mean by the Arab world?
Well, actually, I challenged that motion. I said, the Arab world is a diverse political, economic, social, cultural. So and I protested, that categorization from the very beginning. We have a very different. We have a very different culture.
You chose to sit there and talk against that motion.
No. Well, actually.
Let's be honest. You chose.
Let's be frank. The culture, the political culture in each country is different. The economy, the educational system. So each country has its. So the conflict. Eventually, I want to get to this point again. That this extremist is not an Arab It's a localized, nationalized political processes. Political processes happen at the national level.
Okay.
You have in Jordan, what you have in Jordan is different than what you had in Syria, because there's a context for each country, and there is a local, culture, political culture. So in that sense, the whole idea of Arab extremism or Islamic extremism is not at all, in my opinion, helpful in understanding what's going on today.
All right, you're regretting coming here, obviously. Adnan Hayat.
No, I'm not.
I'm talking about the Arab governments, and I'm not talking about the Arab people. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing genetic about the Arab people or the Muslims. And I think anybody who lives in the conditions of the Arab world, I think you will find a rise of extremism. And there's one other point I think you have to keep in mind, that most of the regimes do not constitute states, because any collapse of the regime, the state will fall. After the collapse of Saddam, the state fall. After the collapse, or hopefully with Assad, the system will fall. After the collapse of Muammar Gaddafi, they fall. The story of the Arab world is not building states, it's building regimes and taking advantage of that states.
Gentleman there, you had your hand up. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to hear from you what you mean exactly by extremism. Because since the beginning of the debate, you mentioned some different organizations like IS, like the Taliban, like the Muslim Brotherhoods. We could mention, why not the Hamas or the Hezbollah or any other kind of organization. What is extremism? Is it terrorism or is it Islamism? If we consider France, where I come from, the Front National, we consider it as an extremist organization, or some people consider it as extremist organization, but it doesn't mean they do terrorism.
Okay, all right. You asked your question. We'll get the panel to answer.
The question is for you.
What do you understand by extremism?
Extremism, I think the use of force for political purposes is part of it. I think
terrorism, in other words.
Yes.
Terrorism, in other words. Okay.
Well, not very much
very briefly.
And it could be
very briefly, because I don't want to get bogged down on definitions.
Yeah,
very briefly.
Yeah, okay.
Extremism means exclusion, not respecting, not accepting the others, and whether it is at the political level or military
like
level.
some Arab governments who are extremists too.
Okay.
Well, that's your own understanding. I will not argue with this, but this is the ideology. This is the extremist ideology.
Don't you think Malki was an extremist? Do you think Assad was an extremist?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I think he was.
Of course he was.
I think he was. Okay, all right. Lady in the front row.
Zainab Marwan. I think when we have the American here in the Arab region, and the Israelis, and the Iranis, we will never ever live in peace.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Don't you think that when we have our enemy between our flesh and the blood, we will never ever live in peace? I think we need to take out our enemy from our region. If we are terrorists, leave us alone. Let us live the way we want, and we will kill each other, and you will stay safe. Thank you.
You want to be left alone to kill each other, did you say?
If you think that we are the killer, so go home. Go home to not being killed.
Okay, Musa Shtaybi.
See, when they went to actually, the Americans came to Iraq by invitation, and when they left, actually, some groups they knew that their situation would be very bad. I'm not defending force, the president of the Americans, but the fact that if we don't have the Americans or the British or whatever does not mean that we can solve all our problems. It is extremely difficult today to imagine that we can live without interaction with the international communities. I think the blame, in my opinion, regardless of this conspiracy theory that I don't believe in, the blame is on us, on the Arab people, the Arab governments, the Arab political parties. It is our problems, and we have to solve it. And if there is any conspiracy or any party that wants to use us for other purposes, if we allow them, I think it's our shortcoming, not their shortcoming. So it's we have to deal with our own problems.
You don't agree
Let's
with that,
stop blaming the others for our problems. We have deep problems. We have to solve them in our own.
Who should we blame? The governments, I think you should blame. They are the responsible for the rise of extremism. They benefited from that, and I think Zainab, point is well taken in regard not to the Americans, to the Arab regimes. They use the theories to divert attention from the real issue.
All right, okay. I'm going to take a question from the gentleman over there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Dr. Shtewi, you said previously that the government struggle. It's regional powers and international powers. My question to you, do you not think that democracy and political representation in the Arab countries is a part of fighting the extremism, the extreme ideology? And you also said, Dr. Shtewi, that extremist groups have hijacked the political process. What do you think about when governments hijack the political process from people?
Okay, thank you for the first question.
By the way, which governments did you have in mind?
Yeah, it will help.
Okay, in my opinion, I think there's Egypt as an example of hijacking the political process. I think that in Libya, and maybe to a certain extent, there is that case where they hijack the political process for their personal gains, of course.
Okay.
And I totally agree that the best way to fight extremism, whether social or political, is through democracy and human rights and civil rights. But this is not something that governments can give to people. People have to obtain that by themselves.
How? Governments may not give it, but they can certainly take it away.
Well, okay, but let me just finish my statement. In certain cases, this is an example. But the idea is that to fight extremist ideas, democracy is the answer, definitely. Now, whether governments can hijack, I think when I said, people hijacked, the Arab extremists hijacked the Arab Spring. If you look at some cases in Syria, we all know there are at least 3 or 4 regional and maybe 2 or 3 international actors that have created and supported these groups in Syria. They were not fighting to promote democracy in Syria. They were fighting to promote their own interest in Syria. Now, if government hijack democracy, I think in the case of Egypt, I'm not defending what happened in Egypt, but in the case of Egypt, I think the struggle was more than just a struggle for democracy, because the previous regime was not really promoting democracy anyway.
Okay.
The Morsi's regime was not promoting democracy. The struggle was for the nature of the state, for the identity of the state in Egypt, and I think as much as there was support for Morsi in the past, there was a lot of support for removing Morsi.
All right, Dr. Shtewi, you made your point.
If they're fighting extremism, why they cannot get to the sole problem of extremism? That high gross human rights violations are happening in the Arab world. I would agree.
That's not the only reason. That's not the only reason for extremism, is it?
That will explain about 54% according to the correlation run by the Global Terrorism Index.
And
I am also maybe other factors, but most of the terrorist attacks that were happened in 2014, they happened in 4 countries, and there's the 4 countries they were responsible. I think we're talking about Syria and in Egypt, and the 2 groups that are responsible for that, they're ISIS and Al Qaeda. But let me confess that the Arab governments are very smart. They're very smart because they stayed in power for a long time. They play that game of legitimacy and effectiveness. Effectiveness, when people ask for political rights, they raise salaries and they give economic benefits. So people will forget about that. And when there's a lack of legitimacy, and when our poor governments, they cannot support for the people, they talk about legitimacy, they open up for election, some broaden dictatorships. But then at the end of the day, they are not interested in democracy.
Okay.
We did not have a single democratic country in the history of the Arab world, with the exception of Lebanon.
Okay, all right. Gentleman in the blue.
Do you think the Islamic Brotherhood in Egypt or in other Arab states are considered extremists or terrorists in any way? And if not, what's the difference between them and other Islamists?
Absolutely not. Terrorists are not at all. Of course not. But what I was referring to in Egypt, that when the Muslim Brotherhood came to power, was unable to promote democracy and be inclusive and respect all the dimensions and the values of democracy. That's what I was saying. Of course, Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, we have Muslim Brotherhood movement that has been legal, operating for 50 years, participate in the political process, and they absolutely have nothing to do with neither terrorism nor extremism. I'm not saying at all that's the case, but the question is, ideologically, can any ideology that uses religion exclusively to say that I want to build a religious state, Can it really be, able to build a modern society, inclusive society? Today we have, people from different religions, different ethnic groups, different, value systems. We have atheists, we have, believers, non-believers. Can the doctrine of, any political group that claims to represent a religion be able to be really inclusive and allow everybody to live on it? This is the question that I'm asking.
Islamist forces, they won the election in okay, go ahead. Islamist forces, they won the election in Algeria, and people were all the international community were against them. Muslim Brotherhood, they won election, I think, in 2006 in Palestine, and people were against them. I'm not saying that Muslim Brotherhood are very popular in the Arab world. Yes, they function in about 70 countries in the whole world, but most of the people, they voted for them because of negative voting theory. They hate the government, they voted for the Muslim Brotherhoods. That's not necessarily they are supportive of Muslim Brotherhoods. But Muslim Brotherhoods, they're right because they were never given the opportunity.
They were in Egypt for 1 year.
Yeah, but you gave
some opportunity.
You gave the dictatorships for about 50 years to achieve anything. They did not. Most of the ills is because of them. And you did not give them even 1 year.
Okay, all right. Lady over there, you have a question.
How do you say these governments are fighting extremism when you have Egypt that suppresses freedom of speech daily, when you have Saudi Arabia that practices the most barbaric rule of law, and when you have governments in the Levant region like Lebanon and Iraq and Jordan that fail to encompass all sects in their governmental policies?
Well, first of all, let me remind you again that the rise of extremism in the region came after the collapse of the state of Iraq and Syria, and not, after Sisi came to power. This is one thing. The other thing, I don't want to get into argument about what Saudi Arabia and the Gulf does, but what I want to say now, we are in a new situation. We are in a new era. There is, ISIS, and these groups, pose a threat to all of these countries, whether they are democratic or not democratic. So to say that some Arab Gulf countries are fighting extremism does not say that they have become democratic overnight. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and others have unified most of the states in the region because there is a threat for the very establishment, the stability of the region. And the polls that we have looked at.
Yeah, but take the questioner's point of view about the repression that these governments are meting out, that this is extremism as well.
Well, of course, any government that does not allow participation and suppress people, this is oppression, definitely. There's no doubt about that. But that
so that encourages extremism.
But the fact that they possible. But the fact that they oppose and they are in the fight against ISIS does not again mean that they have become democratic overnight. But definitely there is an ideological struggle, and these countries, in my opinion, will face problems of their own, due to this contradiction that they are going through.
All right.
Most of the Sunnis were fighting, and I think they almost kicked out of Al-Qaeda from Al-Mosul in Iraq. And what did the Maliki government did toward these Sunni groups? I think they were hammered, they were ignored, and they were not attended to. That's what explained why the ISIS did spread very, very, very fast in that area, because these people have lost any goal to fight for. And I'll go back to my theory. These regime survivors do not give you any reason to fight, because I think they're using you just to fight for the survival.
Okay, all right. Gentleman in the second row. If you could stand up, please. We're most grateful.
A very short question, actually, to both of gentlemen. Both of you talk about democracy as if it is something we have an inheritance of democracy and we've abandoned it. I mean, democracy is something very new to our part of the world. Very, very new and not accepted. How many of us here in this room do accept stuff like Charlie Hebdo and nonsense like that? We are not a democratic people. And I think that and another thing, when you talk about the Muslim Brotherhood and all these implications about Muslim Brotherhood and their role in this part of the world, what is their program? What's the program of Muslim Brotherhood? The Muslim Brotherhood has no program except to sit down and wait for God to save us. I have never seen, I am 72 years old, I have never heard them say anything about a program. They have no program. What we want to do is get ourselves out of our poverty, our backwardness, our ignorance, and all these matters require for us here in Jordan. We had to have the army make sure that our tawjihi results are fair. Where are we talking about democracy and all these states, these Arab states that promote democracy? My God. I mean, I don't want to talk about His Excellency's
not an excellency, just a regular
university where he's teaching. But who's teaching us? Well, who's teaching democracy here?
We do.
Yeah, it's a word that is oversold and it has become meaningless. That's why we are failing to get political parties. Because there is no issue. Nobody is coming and saying, I have a program for you. I am going to make you, instead of making 100 dinars a month, make 200 dinars a month. This is what people care about.
Who do you blame for this situation?
Frankly speaking, I think this is a historical process that we are not in control of. But we are just being...
You said we are not democratic people.
We are not a democratic people. We have never had democracy in our history.
Meaning that you have no democratic instincts? You know what freedom is?
No, it is not. Freedom is not democracy. Freedom is not democracy.
It's part of it. It's part of it.
It's your opinion. It's a Western opinion. We want to accept it. I like it. I like it. I love democracy. But are we sure that this part of the world is ready now for voting? When in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood goes to the villages and say, if you don't vote for me, you go to hell? And people vote for them? Is that democracy?
No, I don't like, with all due respect, I don't like the cherry-picking approach of picking here an issue and there and making a generalization. Democracy is well known, it is a universal, and we Arabs are not exception to these universal aspirations. Democracy is the way of choosing leaders and having
so why do you have so little of it? Why do you have so little of it then?
Because we were never given the opportunity, because we are living in a fixed control governments that are using a lot of force. From a rational perspective, if I am to go against the government, I will lose my life. So from rationality perspective, I should just shut up and continue like a slave. We cannot consider people as citizens. We are subordinates. We are supposed to live and eat and just wait until we die at the age of 60 or 70, and that's all.
Can I
come back, please?
In Jordan here would have lots of oil, then we will have democracy automatically. I mean, the question of democracy...
They haven't managed it in the Gulf, have they?
Now, I will talk much more seriously. Let's talk about countries like Singapore. How much democracy did these people have before they developed? Did they wait for their educational system to develop first? How much have we done to our educational system in Jordan today, in the last 30 years? You study, I'm a Muslim. My grandchildren study that if they go into a bathroom, they go with their right hand and wish for God to forgive them from the dirt of the dirtiness or whatever it is.
Go with the left.
And they go out with the left. And they do that. What is this? Is this our religion? We are here.
No,
we are studying nonsense in our schools. This is what we have to take care of.
You know, when you say something that consists of a freedom, when it hurts, you should not say it. When it hurts, you should not do it. When you know that 1.5 billion people will get hurt of a cartoon, you should not do it. That's all. This is not a democracy.
And what if you do it? And what if you do it?
What if you do it? That's fine. It is up to you. I think we are, he said there's not democracy. I think if you look at the history, you should not pick and choose. The history of Islam, it has a lot of tolerance for others. There are atheists in the Muslims' history. They were respected. And they were, I think, Jews, Christians, they all live within that Islamic culture. But do we see now Islam? I don't think so. So this is what's really happening is not representative of Islam.
Okay, all right. Musa,
I think the discussion is about the modern state, not the historical state, the Arab state. I mean the modern state that post-colonial states. We had our democratic and liberal moments. We must admit. In Egypt, in Iraq, in many other countries, of course, coup d'etats, that, took away all of this. What I'm saying is, democracy, again, I agree with the gentleman. Democracy is a very long process. It talks about institutions, building cultures, values, and mechanisms, for dealing with differences, for, handling things. And if we compare ourselves today with the United States, I think we are doing injustice to ourselves. I mean, most of the Arab countries today, their age is 100 years old. I mean, the oldest probably is 100 years. Some of them 50 years.
Why we can't do that? I think
I'm not saying we cannot do this.
If you look at World War II, most of the countries, they were destroyed. Europe was destroyed. Japan was destroyed. And we started with them at the same level.
Europe, you're not Germany.
What's your point?
What's my point? There's something that's not really happening.
It's the government?
Of
Only
course.
the governments?
Of course it's the government.
No, I think
the
it's
government,
historical.
they put that to curriculum, what they teach and what they not teach. After September 11th, they changed
building,
all of the verses
Quran.
of the Quran that's called for jihad. What's happening? We're having a decline of extremism in the Arab world. This is not true. Look at the failed states index. I just have some numbers. Most of the Arab states are failed states. Somalia number 5, Somalia number 2, Sudan number 5, Yemen is number 8, Iraq is number 13, Syria is number 15.
You are confirming my argument that extremism is a result of the failing states. I think this is exactly what I'm talking about. We have failed to build, inclusive states in the region, and building states is a long process. And in what I see
but
today,
I should have a say.
I see today,
I should have a say as an individual. Where should we go?
Okay, gentleman at the back. Yeah.
My name is Omar Tawil. Thank you for the debate. I've seen this going out of proportion as well, because the whole debate, because we are only pointing on regimes that they are fighting extremism or not, but we're not pointing the source of extremism. How can you fight extremism if every one of us in this room is angry because the state of Israel is always killing our brothers and sisters, and we have nothing to do with it? We can't even go to court. We can't even say no. The only thing we can do is just keep quiet, and they are doing what they're doing.
Okay, so the state of Israel, according to you, is responsible for all the extremism that you're seeing here?
Yes, sir.
It's responsible.
Yes, sir.
It's responsible for Muslims killing Muslims.
Yes, it's responsible for turning me into an extremist because I can't do anything against them.
Okay, Musa Shtewi.
No, it's for Dr. Hiyajin, actually.
I'll come to him.
Extremism, I always actually said, that the Israeli extremism and Jewish extremism long preceded, Muslim extremism or Arab extremism. And there's an extremist state actions.
Okay, you
but it's not,
buy this, that this is what's causing extremism here?
It is part. It is not all. Definitely, what Israel does in Palestine, and also the very extremist Jewish agenda for.
But the actions of Israel are persuading Muslims to go out and kill other Muslims.
That's what I'm saying.
Which is what we're saying.
That is part of it, and have our own problem. The source of extremism in this region is really the inability of our states to build inclusive states.
Okay,
we're going back. And I'm sorry, just one point. I mean, when the Iraqi state collapsed. I mean, there was no political parties, no civil society. People went back either to religion or tribe to protect their own interests.
Okay,
so it's a survival. It's a survival mechanism for many.
You made the point.
If the Arab governments were supporting, I think, the fight against extremism, they should not be aligned, I think, with Israel. I think they even failed to have a halt of the attacks against the people in Gaza. I think they were in line, I think, with the Israeli government. I think they were compatible, I think, in the views, and at least they did not do anything about it.
But what about the questioner's view that Israel is responsible for the extremism?
Israel is huge, but the Arab governments are not doing anything. I think they used it as a symbol of the liberation, and there is nothing to do because we want to liberate Palestine, and nothing happened at the end of the day. No liberation, no economic development, no nothing.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the point of the proceedings. We're going to vote on the motion that the Arab world is embracing extremism, not fighting it. Everybody, I believe, has a voting card. If you want to vote for the motion, that is the side represented by Adnan Hawajne, you're going to tick the top box if you want to vote against it. The side represented by Musa Shtewi, it's the bottom box. Would you please mark the card appropriately according to your wishes. Just a reminder that this debate is going to be shown on Deutsche Welle around the world. Please stay in touch with us via our website, via Facebook and Twitter, and we're always glad to hear your response to the debates. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have the vote. For the motion, 59%, against the motion, 41%. The motion has been convincingly carried. Let me just tell you how you voted before the debate. At that point, it was 48% for the motion and 51% against. So there's been a swing of 10% in favor of the motion. So you picked up quite a few votes along the way. All that remains for me to do is to thank our two distinguished speakers for braving the traffic. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to you, the audience, as well, for your participation, for your questions. That's it from the New Arab Debates here in Amman, Jordan. Have a good, safe journey home. Thanks very much for coming. Good night. Thank you. Thank you.